But if we had to leave it off, mentioning it until next time, that'd be
Right.
all right. Good evening. It's about time for us to get started. And it is good to see everybody, and we're glad that we can be together tonight to study from God's Word. So as we pick up in chapter 33, we are really kind of in the middle of an encounter where, as of chapter 32, Jacob is making preparations to meet Esau. Now, some of the preparations that he's making is he's dividing his family so that if Esau attacks one, he doesn't attack both. Then Jacob goes to God in prayer, and maybe you say, well, why does he do his strategy first and then pray? Well, I think there's wisdom in that. I think if there's a threat outside of my house, I'm locking the door first and then praying. Maybe there's some prudence in that, but also he demonstrates his faith, I think, by the fact that he goes to God and pleads with Him on the basis of God's promises. You promised, now I need you to come through. And he also demonstrates that in that wrestling match, where his persistence and his refusal to let go is rewarded with a blessing. And I think that is the lesson of the wrestling match, is that Jacob's persistence and refusal to let go of God will result in a blessing. And that event is telling him, your prayer has been answered. You will be blessed. I think we see a Jacob in chapter 33 that takes that seriously, that understands and believes that. I think maybe one of the things, and Brother Gerald has emphasized this a couple of times, like with Abraham and Isaac, one thing that I'm seeing even more here is that it is all right and maybe even proper for us to notice the failures of the patriarchs. Abraham and his failures, Isaac and his failures, Jacob and his failures. Keeping in mind that the Hebrew writer points to these as examples of tremendous faith. So how do we balance those two things out? One way is that we say, listen, they do make mistakes, but on the whole, they never turn away from God. They never let go. They never lose their allegiance to Him. They make great sacrifices for Him. So I think maybe at some points along the way, even tonight, I might say, now I'm not sure Jacob goes far enough here, but he does great things in response to God. And mostly the person that we're looking at in all of this is God and Him keeping His promises to Jacob and to the other patriarchs. So I think it would be worth just reading a few verses. And if you'll read with me, let's go from chapter 33, 1 to 11. Anything I need to say back as far as background? Everybody kind of know where we are. He's making preparations to meet Esau. It's night. He's been wrestling. This is the next day. Chapter 33, verse 1. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, then Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. Let me just make a comment right here. I noticed that the strategy is different, right? He's not dividing them up in preparation for attack. I think he's dividing them up in preparation for introductions, because he doesn't go at the rear, he goes ahead of them. Because he can see Esau coming, he's marching straight toward Esau. This is not the same kind of like military strategy of trying to make sure we all don't get killed. This is preparing to meet Esau. I think there's a difference here. But verse 4, Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. All right, so he goes to meet Esau. What is Jacob's attitude as he's going out to Esau? What are some things that might indicate what his attitude is as well? Very humble. How do you know that? Yes, I think he's trying to show all the way along. I'm trying to put myself in a subservient position. I recognize you're in the position to do harm in this case. That's good. Anything else? He does. He does. That's right. He's very submissive. Yes, he's kind of putting himself at Esau's mercy. That's right. Sending the gifts ahead. What does that demonstrate? What does he see? Him trying to seek his favor. He's coming in peace, right? He recognizes that he's the one who's in the position to be needing to do some making up, right? He is in the desperate position here. All of that, I think, is exactly right. He's humble. He's subservient. Look at the way they refer to each other. So at the end of verse 8, Jacob says to find favor in the sight of my Lord. And Esau says, I have enough, my brother. And I think that's pretty much the same way all the way through, that Jacob keeps referring to Esau as my Lord and himself as his servant. And Esau keeps saying, my brother. And really, I think it's exactly appropriate in this situation. Jacob is the one who has done the wrong. At least, maybe he's not the only one who's done wrong. I think he's done the greater thing here in the deception. And so he is saying, look, I'm in the position of desperation here. And Esau, who was the wronged one, is using terms of affection. So, I mean, I think that this is as much of a way to reconcile as we could possibly see. And I think sometimes when people have done wrong, they are unwilling then even to subject themselves to any further humbling or further like pleading for mercy. Jacob's not above it. Now, he would have been 20 years ago, but he's not above it at this point. And he's willing to suffer the indignity of being the servant, the humbled one here. And Esau is willing to look over that. And I think both of those are, not look over his humility, but look over his transgression. And I think both of those are really hard positions to be in. And maybe in some ways it's harder to be the one who has done the wrong and now you're coming back. But I don't think either one of them is easy. Yes, Miss Rita? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, do you know, if I understand correctly, the only other time where these words are used pretty close to this, can you guess? I think you'd probably recognize it if I told you. Grabbing his neck, hugging him, kissing him. The prodigal son, right. Yeah, it's the words used of the father towards the son. And what a beautiful picture there of, the father's been longing to see him all along. Well, when Jesus tells that story, the words he chooses are the words that describe what Esau did when Jacob came back. That's a picture of reconciliation and of love and of forgiveness. And maybe it's one of the very best examples of that in all of the Old Testament. Of one forgiving another. Now, I want you to see this exchange here. He's giving these gifts. He's doing that to find favor. The word there is our same word as grace. And so I want to find your mercy. I want to find your grace here. And Esau says, I've got enough. I don't need that. I think Esau was a wealthy man, probably by warfare, if we can look at Isaac's prophecy. And then, so Jacob says, no, you've got to take it. Now, why does he desperately want him to take it?
Help his conscience.
It'll help his conscience, I'm sure, right? This will kind of help him say, all right, maybe I've not paid everything back, but at least I've gotten a good start, right? At least I made a down payment. But also, notice he says there, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. I don't think he means that God is a hairy red man, right? All right? That would be weird. What does he mean here? Yeah, I think that's right. Esau's reaction to Jacob is a reflection of God's blessing on Jacob. And so Jacob will find in Esau's acceptance of him a picture of God's acceptance of him. And so that his acceptance will show his forgiveness, and his forgiveness demonstrates God's mercy. And then that last line there, and he says, God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Now, in our English translations, that looks the same as when Esau says, I have enough. All right, so Esau says, I have enough, and Jacob says, no, I have enough. The word Jacob uses here is stronger, and it's really something like, I have all. I have everything I need, which enough communicates that, but it's stronger than the enough that Esau uses. Jacob says, God has given me all. He's given me everything. And so he urged him, and Esau takes it. And so I think you have finally the picture of reconciliation there.
20 years have passed, and we see two entirely different men at this point in time. Certainly 20 years has softened Esau's feelings towards his brother, and Jacob's done a lot of growing up during the absence. And we see a complete character change with him, to where, as you said, he's a lot more submissive. He's a lot more humble. He's willing to extend himself for others at this point in time. So,
amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else through verse 11? Anything you'd like to say?
I think it showed a lot. It said that they kissed and wept. Brothers, they broke their hearts for both. They gave everything to each other.
Yeah, the fact that both of them are weeping here shows that, because they're on very different sides of this transgression, of this issue. That's right. It's good. All right. Anything else? Okay, very good.
Then Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly, at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. So Esau said, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram. And he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Eloth Israel. So they began going their way, but we see that Jacob's company, his encampment, has been pushed pretty hard. And so he's going to take a slower pace. Esau is going to go on ahead of him and go back to his homeland and Seir. But Jacob, he's going to make some stops along the way before he ever gets to Seir. It mentions Succoth here, where he builds him a house, and I don't know if this is stables or whatnot, booths for his livestock. But don't know how long he stays in Succoth, but he journeys on to Shechem. And here we have our first introduction that's really going to lead to the next story of Hamor and Shechem. And of course, he buys a piece of land there, and for 100 pieces of money. We don't know, the value of this or anything, but there he erects an altar. And what is this El Eloth Israel? What does that mean? Yeah, the God of Israel. Up to this point, we've seen Jacob and his introduction to God. He refers to him as the God of Abraham or the God of Isaac, before. But now, this some time has passed, and promises have been made to Jacob, and of course, Jacob has made promises to God. And we've seen God hold to his promises that he's made to Jacob. Jacob has prospered. He has cared for Jacob. He's looked out for Jacob. And everything Jacob has done, everything has went well, especially at this point. And Jacob has not forgotten that. And so this relationship between him and God has developed to the point that it's no longer the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. He's now the God of Israel, the God of Jacob. And so I think it really describes how this relationship between him and God have matured.
That's great. Very good. All right. Anything else through the end of the chapter there?
Why Israel? because he's not called Israel at this point, right?
Yeah, in 32, in the wrestling match, he's given the name Israel. So, yes. So I understand your question, because in 35, he will be named Israel. I think it's one of those situations where there's a later occasion that reaffirms an earlier pronouncement. Like, perhaps. Chapter 32 and verse 28. Yeah. Yeah. So, yes, it is a little confusing, but it's like the same thing with Esau. He's born red, so he's called Esau, but then later he's the red student, he's called Edom, which means red. It's like Beersheba. Because Abraham made a covenant, it's called Beersheba. Later, Isaac makes another covenant, it's called Beersheba again. I think it's just a reaffirmation of something that had been stated earlier. I think that's what's happening. And there's more to say about that in chapter 35, I think, because there's more than one thing reaffirmed. And I think that's what's happening. I think it's a solidifying of the covenant that God made with Jacob, and he does that by reasserting him, calling him Israel. But that's a good question.
But even moving forward, it is a little bit confusing.
It does.
It flip-flops.
That's right.
Between Jacob, Israel.
Yeah.
And
I'm pretty sure that actually in the narrative, he's very seldom actually called Israel. I think it's almost always Jacob. I don't know why that's the case, unless Israel is just more like an official title or something. But you're exactly right. It's almost always Jacob, even after it specifically says he's Israel. It's like, well, what's going on here? Because like with Abraham, it's always Abraham after that. I don't know other examples, but Sarah would be the same way, I think. That's right. Yeah, and maybe that's part of it, is that Israel becomes the name of the nation, and so for Moses' readers, it makes more sense to just call him Jacob, maybe to limit confusion for them. I don't know about that, but I think that would be a good thing to think about. Okay. Anything else through 33? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to chapter 34 then. Chapter 34. Let me just put forward a suggestion here. I'm not super committed one way or the other. I want you to at least allow for the idea that when that Donna. When we normally talk about Donna, does anybody have like a heading over chapter 34? What does it say?
The defiling.
The defiling. Does everybody say the defiling? The Donna incident. Okay. I think that's probably the best way to refer to this, as just something like the defiling or the incident. There are some headings that will say something like the rape of Donna. I think that reads more into it than we can actually know. Now, the reason that comes up is because of how certain translations render the end of verse 2. Shechem saw her, seized her, lay with her, and humiliated her. If you're using the New American Standard, instead of humiliated, it says lay with her by force, right? And you'd say, well, what else could that be? Violated. Yeah, I think violated is the right word, or humiliated, something like that. That word is not necessarily only used of a rape situation. It would be used in any situation where there's illicit sexual activity that is the result to the woman, right? Now, here's why I'm pointing this out. The word took there, the English Standard Version says seized her. Well, that sounds like out of meanness, right? Grabs her by force. It doesn't mean that in the original language. The word take there is the same word that if it was to say a man would take a wife. It's the same word. And so I'm not saying that that's not what happens. There are some things that make more sense to me if that's not what happens. If this is a consensual relationship that still defiles her, still humiliates her, because this was not appropriate. It was still wrong. Let me just suggest some of those things, and we'll look at them as we go through the text. Shechem's reaction afterwards is not typical of the way rapists act in the Bible, right? Remember when Amnon and Tamar, and after he does it, he despises her. That is not Shechem's reaction, okay? So that's one thing that I'll point to. The other thing is at the end of the chapter, when Simeon and Levi say, well, is he allowed to just treat our sister like a prostitute? Well, if that had happened to my sister, and I say he treats her like a prostitute, that is at best insensitive, right? And at worst just blatantly untrue. That's not what happened, right? This is not, prostitution or harlotry would be a chosen profession, not what people suggest is done to Donna. So I say all of that to say, I would, if somebody said, I really think that's what happened, I'd say okay. But I think we should just leave room for Donna goes out and this is a consensual relationship. It doesn't make it better in some ways, but Shechem's relationship or reaction to her and all that, it helps them make a little bit of sense out of it if that's not the case. So with all that in mind, let's just read it, and then if you have comments or questions about that, maybe Mr. Gerald can answer them. In chapter 34, he didn't bring up the alternative. I mean, when you've heard this story told before, have we assumed that it was rape? I think so too. I think that's the way I probably heard the story told growing up, and that might not be wrong. I think it might give Dinah too much credit for what happens here. So anyway, all that is to say, let's read. Now, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which is important because Simeon and Levi would have been her full brothers. So, and Reuben as well, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her, seized her, and lay with her, and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this girl for my wife. Now, Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it and get property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price and gift as you will, and I will give you whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to him, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are, even as we are, by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter, and we will be gone. Maybe that's a good place to leave off for now. So Hamor comes to Jacob. What do you see in Hamor and Shechem? What's their attitude as they come to Jacob?
They're going to buy their way out with Jacob.
Yeah, maybe. I think they're saying we'll do whatever, right? We'll do whatever it takes. Name as high as a price as you want to name. And some, we may look at this and we say, well, they're offering money. Well, that was the way it worked, right? That's the dowry system. It just is what it is. But what he is saying is, make your price as high as you want to, and I'll pay it. And put whatever stipulations you want. Now, what is their reaction to that? What do they first say with regards to? That's right. Yeah, you're not circumcised. You're not part of this covenant. We can't marry you. They're not wrong about that, right? I think that's accurate. I'm not sure that the circumcision thing just fixes that, and that now all of a sudden we can just intermarry. But they are not wrong about the fact that it would not be proper for them to just give Dinah and then to take their daughter for themselves. In fact, that was what the whole Esau problem was with his wives, and that's why Isaac has to get a wife from back home. That's why Jacob has to go back home, and on and on and on. So this is not. It would not be an ideal situation, I don't think, in either respect. But
it also says they did
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So in verse 13, now they first say, we will not do that. And then, yes, that's right. If, verse 17, you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will be gone. Now, it looks to me like Dinah is still there with Shechem and with Hamor. And I don't know what all to make of that. But anyway, so you have something to say. I may have overlooked something here, but I'm not thinking as clearly as I'd like.
I'm reading it the same way. It seems like there's willful consent on my part as I read this. I don't think she's a hostage.
Right. Yes.
Or anything like that.
Yeah. So at the end of verse 1, when she goes out to see the women of the land, that's a bad idea, right? This is unwise, because we know about the women of Canaan, and we know they're not what they ought to be. We know that they have been a thorn in the side of Isaac and Rebekah a generation before. And so now Dinah is just going to go out and, mingle with the Canaanite women. I don't think that's an ideal situation. But anyway, yeah, I appreciate you saying that. That's good.
The boys do, they've got a plan in place.
Yeah, that's right.
They got ulterior motive here in setting the stage for what's gonna take place.
Yeah, and Jacob is painfully silent through all of this.
Yes, he is.
So, and again, I don't want to read more into it than I'm supposed to, but I'm going to read into it. Maybe he doesn't get aggravated until the very end, and the thing he gets aggravated about, well, we'll notice that when he gets there. But where's his indignation? Where's his fury here? And even when they're dealing deceitfully, does he know? I don't know. But anyway.
That makes more sense to me as well. Their plan, if he just had took her and raped her, why would they have that plan, and why did they think that would work if that was the case?
Yeah, right.
Since he has legitimate feelings for her, they think, well, we can get him to do whatever.
Yes, I think that's a great point. Like, we're not talking about a situation where, you said it just right. I'm adding commentary. That's just right. They think they have him right where they want him. He'll do whatever.
And everybody has motives in this too. Hamor, even though he's willing to pay whatever for the bride price, we know that he has thoughts leading in this too. That they're gonna benefit greatly by pulling in Jacob and his house.
Yeah, when they go back to the city, that's going to be the major point that they make. Anything else through 17? We'll kind of get a resolution. Well, I don't know if it's a complete resolution. It's kind of awful, but in verse 18, as we move forward, we'll get some more information.
Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us to become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us." And all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. And on the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure, and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives. All that was in the houses they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should we treat our sister like a prostitute?" So, yeah, this they agree. You know, Hamor and Shechem, they have influence with the people there, obviously, great influence. And so they convince everybody this is going to be a win-win. All right, there's going to be a little bit of sacrifice up front on our part, no question. But, you know, this is going to be a win-win for us because Jacob, you know, he has a lot of possessions. He's got a lot to offer us. And so what he has will become ours as well. So everybody's, yeah, we're in this. It sounds good to us. So they do it. And the stage is set. Because on the third day, these men are basically just crippled. You know, there's no way for them to fight. I mean, they can't. They could probably barely move. And what happens? Yeah, the Dinah's brothers come in, and two men come in and just annihilate the entire city, the entire village, kill all the men. But you know, you can certainly, in some ways, maybe understand uh, some of the feelings they would have in what took place here. But is there justification to say, hey, let's go in and not only kill all, you know, we're going to plunder and take everything, take their wives, take their children? It's tough. This is one of those stories that's very dark, and you know, there's nothing here that we see that seems to imply that this was okay. It's just telling the story as it happens. And so Jacob, how does he feel about this? Yeah, you know, I wonder where he was. You know, it almost seemed like it's starting in verse 13. It says the sons of Jacob answered. I was thinking that when this proposition was first made, Jacob was with them, but I don't know as this thing unfolds where he's at. You know, he doesn't seem to have any restraint on his boys as far as throughout this story and how this unfolds. So it makes me wonder, you know, what he was involved in and what he wasn't involved in. Obviously, he wasn't involved in the direct violence, but you know, I don't know how much going into it he understood or knew of the plan.
Well, from the scripture there, you can see that it's been 3 days from the time they were circumcised, and it was probably could have been up to a day of Hamor and his son talking to all the men and goading them that, hey, you know, if you'll all be circumcised, we're going to get Jacob's all these animals that he's got and all the money that he's got. This is a very wealthy person. It'll be all of us, but you got to comply with their requests so that they'll actually give us their daughters and we'll give them their daughters. So I think both of them actually used the greed and pride of the men for the gold and the goods that they were going to receive out of doing the circumcision. And then during that time, undoubtedly, Jacob wasn't around when the two boys actually went in to camp. So everybody was there, all the men, they were able to fight. So they just slaughtered all of them. I guess after they seen how much stuff that they had, they go, oh, besides killing them, we're just going to take the goods and men or the children and the women with us when we leave.
Yeah, so it's at least ironic that Hamor and his son thought that they were going to end up with all the goods, and it's Jacob and his family that ends up with all the goods. Maybe the thing that bothers me about Jacob's response is that Jacob looks like Jacob here and not like Israel. And what I mean by that is, remember when he and Rebekah deceived deceived Isaac, and what his concern is, well, what if he knows it's me and he curses me? Well, that's exactly the same kind of answer he gives here. You've made me stink. He doesn't say this is not right. This is unjust. This is violent in God's sight. That's not what he says. Now the people are going to be mad at me. And maybe that's a part of the concern, right? But also he says, and I'm few. Well, did he not remember the promises God had made to him? Right? Like in chapter 31, there's this other host of angels that are there, and maybe that's an indication of these people are with God. These are God's people, God's messengers. They're with Jacob. But Simeon and Levi seem unrepentant in this. They say, well, he did this, right? And maybe we would say this is another situation where nobody is on the moral high ground here, right? Nobody's in the right. Shechem's not in the right, and Dinah's not, at least Shechem is not in the right at the beginning, regardless. He does have a change of heart, or at least maybe his heart is right in that he wants to marry her, which would be the appropriate response to this, at least I think according to the rest of the law. But Hamor's attitude doesn't seem to be on the up and up here. Simeon and Levi said, and yet you would expect, we should expect, I guess, Jacob to be a little bit more thinking more than just life under the sun, thinking on a higher plane, and it doesn't look to me like he is. But yeah, go ahead.
Another thing we don't see happen is we don't see anybody going to God.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's what you said. It's in a situation where everybody's trying to kind of take the situation in their own hands, right? And that doesn't ever work out.
That's right. Yeah, when we're always trying to figure out how we can get the most out of the situation, that's not generally the best way.
Well, the Bible I'm reading from verse 30 said that Jacob says, "You have troubled me by making me obnoxious."
Yeah.
So usually when you're around someone obnoxious, you really don't want to be obnoxious. And that's what I think Jacob is like when he tried to deceive Isaac. It's all about he's obnoxious. It's all about him.
Yeah, I've never even thought about that with all of the personal pronouns there in verses. Me, making me, my numbers, if they gather themselves against me and attack me, my, man, pretty self-centered there. That's in other places we see godly men say, "How dare you do this because of what it's going to do to the name of God?" And that's not what Jacob says. And I'm not saying, obviously we know Jacob's not a perfect person. I'm not saying he's not a faithful person. I think he is faithful in many, many things and makes very great, tremendous sacrifices. But here's maybe a place where there's some limits to that faithfulness.
When you see all this stuff like this, it shows these are men, these are not
Yeah.
these are fallible.
Right.
Because there was people all the time
Absolutely.
who wanted to worship people like
Yeah.
Abraham, such as that. And it shows that these people are not to be worshipped. They make mistakes.
That's right.
And emotions are running high.
Yeah.
Obviously, with this event, and it makes you wonder. It'd been one thing if they would have pronounced judgment on Shechem and even his father Hamor, but all the men of the city, I don't know if they thought, well, if we try to take these two prominent people out, then we're probably going to have to run for the rest of our days. I don't know. I don't know how they justify taking it as far as they took it.
Yeah, when you think that your cause is just and that any end justifies the means, that you get in a dangerous place, right? Where if you think of yourselves as righteous and them as evil, and you're willing to do anything, it takes you down a bad road. Okay. Anything else? Through 34.
This was the part where Jacob heard of what happened to Dinah. He keeps silent. He waits for the boys to come in.
Yeah.
It's like he's not going to take the leadership role. He's going to let somebody else deal with it.
Yeah.
Later on.
Yeah, and maybe that's the thing about Jacob here is just abdication. It's not that he does anything actively bad. It's that he doesn't do anything. And maybe that's the biggest problem, at least in the way the story as we have it is presented. And I'm sure we're getting a abbreviated, we're not getting a blow-by-blow account, but we get a lot, and Jacob doesn't do anything in it. He just is kind of sitting around waiting. So I think that's a very good point.
I think it's an excellent point because you think about his sons, how old are they now?
Yeah.
They're not that old. So
No,
he's
that's
letting very immature young men take the lead on this occasion. And how does it turn out?
Yeah.
It's a disaster of sorts.
That's right.
You just see in the very next verse that God talks to him and commands him to do something else. So God's obviously still there and in control because God continues to tell him what to do next.
Yeah. All right. We have about 5 minutes, so enough time to get started, I think. And let's look at the first 4 verses. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. So chapter 35, God speaks to Jacob and says, "Go to Bethel." I think that he was always supposed to come back to that place. And I'm not sure about all of the reasons why he has not up to this point. Maybe there was, look at verse 5, I'm just going to mention this. A terror of God fell upon the cities that were around them, so they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Maybe there was a fear of the people who were living in that area at this time, that kept Jacob from going as far as he was supposed to go. But in chapter 31 and verse 3, the Lord said, "Return to the land." Well, I just passed away from it. Sorry. 31.
Land of your fathers.
Yeah, land of your fathers. That's right. "And I will be with you." That was the promise that God had made to Jacob. So now he's ready to go back to Bethel, house of God. This is going to be the place where he experienced God's presence, where he said, "I didn't even know God was here." And he was. So what has to happen first? Got to get rid of the idols, right? If we're going to the house of God, we've got to get rid of the foreign gods. Now, I imagine that this is the moment at which Rachel brought out those. And if Jacob didn't know up until this point, and maybe he already knew, but man, how he must have been thinking about those words that he said to Laban: "Whoever has these gods, I'll put them to death right here." And then she brings those out.
Also, about this saying, him telling them to give the foreign gods, and they've done it with the earrings. You have to also realize that his sons actually brought all these women from these people they slaughtered with them.
Yeah.
And they probably got all their gods that they was worshiping in the city with them. And Jacob probably had seen them as he was going through all the people. And he knew that right there was not right in God's eyes. And to actually be with God, he told everybody, y'all need to gather up all these idols that you got, gods, anything that y'all worship, and bring it to me, and then you hear it.
That is a good point.
That's a very good point.
Yep.
Because when the people, before they come into the land in Deuteronomy, Moses is going to warn them about
idolatry.
all the idolatry is going to be there, and he's going to tell them, of course, you are people that never had anything, but they're going to be overlaid with gold, they're going to be overlaid with silver, but you are to despise it. Yeah. Because what they represent, even with the gold or silver, despise it.
That's right. Yeah, and the rings very often that were in the ears, archaeologists have found tons of these earrings that would actually be made into the shape of the god. So they would literally be carrying them around on their ears. They would have little idols on their ears. So let me just mention, you've got 2 places mentioned here, Shechem and Bethel. And both of these are going to be very important as we go into the rest of the Bible story, and especially as the Israelites come in. Shechem has been important. This was the place where Abraham was when God said, "I'm going to give you this land." Right? So that's where Jacob comes back to. And then Bethel will be one of the places that they will come to. It will actually be used for bad purposes, right? Jeroboam will set up one of the golden calves there. But can you understand why that would have had some resonance, or it would have been reasonable to the people that this is where we're going to set up a house of worship? This is the house of God. Jacob knew a long time ago this is where God was. And so maybe that kind of played into why he would have chosen that place as one of the sites for the golden calf worship, because people would have said, well, we know God is here. We know he has been before. And so those places are going to come into play later on. I think that putting away their gods, purifying themselves, changing their garments is a really interesting picture of repentance, right? There is some putting away that has to happen. There's some cleansing that has that. There's some changing that has to happen. And so maybe there's a sermon in that, but I think I'm preaching that sermon Sunday, so y'all just wait.
By, in verse 5, the chair of God.
Yeah, I think that God in some way caused them to be afraid so that they would not attack Jacob and his family. I think this is probably a supernatural protection that's placed on Jacob and his family.
Also, the changing of the clothes, is that because they don't know how to clean make their heart right? So he's telling them to make it.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe the changing of the clothes, it would be like a ritual thing. Yeah. So very often, even in the law, right? So Exodus chapter 19, God tells them, get yourselves ready, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, because I'm about to come and give you the law. I don't think it was ever just supposed to be about washing and changing the clothes, but the old covenant was a covenant that was more tangible. And I think God wanted them to see in a physical way what they should have been doing spiritually all along. I don't think there's any indication that God did not care about what they were doing about their hearts. But I think the washing of the clothes and the changing, the washing their skin and changing the clothes was supposed to preview. So like the priests, they were supposed to wash as they go in and make the sacrifices. But God always wanted them to be cleansed from the inside out. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Exodus 19, that's right. Very good.
Maybe those things were going to take up their bond.
Yeah.
Like we do these things in preparation for this.
Yeah.
So they would have their bond on that.
Yeah, and I think that's what I think the temple was that. I think the physical priesthood to look at was that. I think the altar fires burning with that, the sacrifices being made. I think all of those things were pictures. So even for us to go back and say, okay, what do you mean cleanse your hearts, you sinners? Well, I mean, the same way you would cleanse your body and you would change your clothes, there's a purification, there's a getting rid of the filth process that goes, that this gives us images to use when we're talking about the spiritual transformation. Now, Jesus will say all of this was only pointing to the heart stuff, right? Mark chapter 7. He says it's not what goes into a person that deposits, but what comes out. But that was true for them too. God wanted their hearts too. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. That's in the Old Testament. That's not a New Testament principle. But the spiritual realities in the New Testament, that's where all the emphasis is, even more so on the washing of the skin. 1 Peter 3. Baptism would be a good example of thinking about that. Okay, we're out of time, so we'll pick up there on Sunday night, and what would that be? The middle of verse 5, really, of chapter 35. Is that okay? Good? All right.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.